Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our breakout, Who Supports Carbon Pricing Faith Leaders. Thank you all for joining. We are so looking forward to this discussion today. My name is Andrea Zink, and I am a volunteer co-leader of the United Methodist Action Team within CCL. And again, we're thrilled to be here and have this discussion around a faith perspective. So I'm going to go over just a couple of housekeeping things first and kind of the flow of the breakout, and then we're going to jump right into our discussion. So we're going to do a Q&A style breakout, and we have a couple of questions we're going to start with to get the discussion going. And then we would love to hear from you for live questions that you may have. So to submit a question, if you look to the right of this panel screen, you'll see a tab that says Q&A. If you click on that and then type in your question and submit it, we will get to those after the questions that we have initially. And you can also upvote questions. So if there's already a question submitted that you want to make sure gets answered, just click the up arrow to vote for it and put it to the top of the list. So again, this breakout session is Who Supports Carbon Pricing Faith Leaders. So as we know, people of many faiths embrace the idea of creation care, taking care of God's good gift of the earth. So today we have with us Jose Aguto and Tori Goebel with us to discuss how their faith guides their climate action and how you can build relationships with faith leaders in your community. Tori serves as the National Organizer and Spokesperson for Young Evangelicals for Climate Action. She holds an undergraduate degree in Communications and Political Science from Gordon College and a Master's of Environmental Law and Policy from Vermont Law School. Tori has spent 4 years as Communications Director for YECA and the Evangelical Environmental Network, YECA's partner ministry. During this time, she has also served on YECA's National Steering Committee. She brings her passion for political organizing and policy advocacy to this role, as well as her skills of professional communications and marketing. She was born and raised in New England and currently lives in the Boston area. And we also have with us Jose Aguto. So Jose is the Associate Director of the Catholic Climate Covenant, which collaborates with Catholic organizations and across sectors to advance the Church's call to love and care for God's creation, our vulnerable neighbors, and all people, including those that we may view as adversaries. Building bridges across differences is an important component of this work. Before joining the Covenant, Jose worked for the Friends Committee on National Legislation, the National Congress of American Indians, EPA's American Indian Environmental Office, and the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights under law. He graduated from Brown University and Villanova Law School and served with the U.S. Army's 10th Mountain Division. So Jose and Tori, thank you so much for being with us today. You both have very impressive resumes, and I'm really looking forward to this discussion.
It's a blessing to be with you, Andrea. Thank you.
Yeah, it's great. All right. Well, we'll just dive right in. So just to start with, can both of you just describe a little bit more of the work that you do at your organizations? Tori, if you'll start us off.
Yeah, thanks. And thank you to everyone who's here. I know there's a lot of great breakout sessions and things to be doing on your Saturday. So it's great to be here with you, and I really appreciate the invite to chat today. So I'm with YECA, Young Evangelicals for Climate Action. YECA was founded in 2012 out of the recognition that at the time, climate change wasn't really being discussed on the national scale in that election cycle. And so YECA was formed to bring the voice of young Christians to the national stage when it comes to creation care and climate action. So our mission is we're just a group of young Christians who are coming together to overcome and address the climate crisis as a key part of our Christian discipleship and witness. For us, we're not doing this because we're Democrats or Republicans or environmentalists. We're doing this because we are called to be faithful followers of Christ, to love God and to love our neighbor. And so to carry out this mission, we have 3 main pillars of our work. The first is mobilizing our generation. Our flagship program under that is our Climate Leadership Fellows, which works to train, equip, and empower college students to create change on their campus communities and in their churches. The second pillar of our work is holding our political leaders accountable and advocating for real change. And a price on carbon is one of the ways we do that. And I'm excited to chat more about that later. And finally, the third pillar of our work is engaging with our older church leaders. For many people in YECA, myself included, we did not hear about climate change or creation care in church and how it really is a key part of our faith. And so we want to help talk about this in churches. An example of that, in 2020, we wrote an open letter to the attendees of the National Prayer Breakfast, calling on them to include the victims of the climate crisis in their prayers, and then to go back to their churches and have real discussions in their congregations. So that's just a high-level overview of the work that YECA does. And again, I'm so glad to be here today.
Thank you, Tori. That was really impressive. And a lot of the themes that you spoke about in your mission are also part of the Catholic Climate Covenant. We seek to lift up the charism of care for creation more fully into the life of the U.S. Catholic Church. The Church, as an overall matter, is about 70 to 75 million Catholics, 193 dioceses, 6,500 parishes, 2,000 schools, 260 colleges and universities, and many, many religious orders. And so we want to lift up that charism so that our Catholic Church more fully embraces a care for creation in prayer, love, and action. So I'll stop there. There's a lot more to say about that, but I'll leave it at that for now. Thank you.
Wonderful. So for both of you, from a faith perspective, why do either you personally or your organization support carbon pricing and or specifically the Energy Innovation Act? And Jose, we'll start with you this time.
Okay. Thank you, Andrea. I first want to draw it out, recognizing the great political and cultural divides we have in our country, and also recognizing the climate crisis, which all of us, I believe, here feel pretty urgently. And it starts first with what I would call faith and reason. And St. John Paul II said in his encyclical, Faith and Reason, that faith and reason are like two wings on which the human spirit rises to the contemplation of truth. So we bring those two wings together in support of climate action. We also start from a place of faith, believing that God's will be done in all circumstances, no matter how dire. And he gives us that strength, for it is of divine origin, not of human origin. And it is part of our charism for over 2,000 years. Because if we look at the climate crisis and the political and cultural divides in our nation, merely human-based hope is deeply challenging. And so that's how I come to this work, from that faith-based perspective, sourced by the power of God and the fellowship of others, and then lifting that out to others through what we in the Catholic faith would call metanoia, or change of heart, and believing that all people, no matter how heinous their actions may be, that they may ultimately have a change of heart and move towards climate action. Because if we look at the political partisanship right now, we as Catholics and Christians can turn to, for example, St. Francis's peace prayer, which says, where there is hatred, let us sow love. Where there is darkness, let us sow light. And that is also reflected by Dr. Martin Luther King in his quote that is enshrined in his at the memorial in Washington, D.C. Darkness cannot drive out darkness, only light can do that. Hate cannot drive out hate, only love can do that. And if we do apply these principles into our political dynamic, we can shine light. And these kinds of principles need to be entered into our political dialogue, and then on our desire to build bridges across difference in our nation. Those great Christian principles of humility, mercy, forgiveness, reconciliation, redemption, and salvation. These are the principles that we need to carry forth in order to render the climate solutions we need in particular. And so, for example, the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops does say, reflecting what Tori mentioned, at its core, and I'm quoting, at its core, global climate change is not about economic theory or political platforms, nor about partisan advantage or interest group pressures. It is about the future of God's creation and the one human family. And this is how we address this from a faith perspective. And I just want to stop here for a second, and then I can go into carbon pricing. But I wanted, this is a core component of our advocacy and our witness moving forward. And I just wanted to stop there for a second, and then I can address more specifically why we support carbon pricing.
Great, beautiful. Those are such beautiful thoughts. Tori, do you want to add from your faith perspective?
Yeah, definitely. This is such a great question. And I'll also start with the big picture about why my faith compels me to care about the climate crisis. I always come back to Matthew 22:37-40, the greatest commandment that says to love God and love your neighbor. And so if I'm called to love God, that should include what God has created, humans and the natural world alike. Because I'm called to love my neighbor, especially those who have been most impacted by harms like air pollution. So given this, along with a variety of other Bible verses pointing to the importance of the natural world and the need to care for those around us, we must take action to address the climate crisis and reduce pollution. So when it comes to looking at policy at YECA, our faith really informs our policy principles. And we seek policy that is equitable, just, bold, transformative, reasonable, and achievable. And while most policies won't hit every single target there, we need an array of bold solutions that will meet these principles. And carbon pricing fits nicely into the climate solution puzzle. Because for far too long, the fossil fuel industry has been subsidized not only with tax breaks, but by freely polluting creation and causing a variety of negative health and climate impacts in our communities. It's time to rapidly transition away from fossil fuels and stop letting companies pollute our shared home. Another reason we're a fan of carbon pricing and the Energy Innovation Carbon Dividend Act is because it's bipartisan, which means it's more likely to be durable. I think we really need solutions that won't be subject to changes with whichever party might be in power at the time. And because we approach this from our faith and not from partisan perspectives, we appreciate the bipartisan nature of carbon pricing because it seeks to transcend those divides and implement tangible, transformative solutions to this pressing issue that really does impact everyone.
Well said. And I think you both have spoke on this a little bit, but Jose, if you want to go into a little more specifically about what are the important considerations from a faith perspective on carbon pricing as well.
Sure. Thank you, Tori. That was beautifully said. And I reflect a lot of what Tori says. I hope I don't repeat. So some of the dimensions, and going to the sort of the reason dimension of why the Catholic Climate Covenant supports carbon pricing, is first, we all know fundamentally that climate change is primarily caused by human-generated greenhouse gases, of which carbon dioxide is the principal pollutant. So it is a pollutant. And so if we're going to get to the root cause of climate change, then we need to address and cap and reduce human-generated emissions of carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases. The carbon tax gets us there in a very efficient way. And in my estimation, and I think this is kind of an imaging issue with regard to carbon pricing legislation, to me, carbon pricing is not a market-based solution. It is a society-based solution that addresses the dynamic between society writ large and those sectors which generate the production of goods. And so what we are trying to do under the polluter pays principle is internalize those costs so that society can continue on. It is the same rationale for why we pay taxes to fund trash pickup, landfills, wastewater treatment plants, to ensure that we have safe drinking water coming out of our taps. So this is not purely a market-based solution. This is, to me, a society-based solution. It's a common sense solution that is good for all of us. Secondly, the efficacy of this, and Tori talked about how quickly and how effectively carbon pricing can, both on a national and international level, drive down greenhouse gas emissions and in turn drive down our increased global temperatures. And many have seen the MIT's En-ROADS climate simulator to see how effective carbon pricing is in that suite of solutions. So we too feel like it is one of those important foundational solutions in the suite of solutions that we all need to engage in order to care for the poor and care for creation. Secondly, another dimension is that we're excited about the relative progressivity of the Energy Innovation and Carbon Dividend Act, knowing that the vast majority of citizens in the lowest income quintiles would benefit from the dividend. We also, though, note that 11 to 12 million undocumented immigrants won't receive this dividend, and so we want to work towards solutions to make sure that somehow they are made whole. And then on a global perspective, as it relates to the border adjustment tax, that all fossil fuel producers who seek to import their fossil fuels into the United States, this tax will be imposed upon them, which would then increase their costs and drive down their production and drive down global greenhouse gas emissions. We have some very significant state-owned fossil fuel companies who own a vast majority of the global fossil fuel reserves who will be impacted by this carbon pricing scheme. And this is another efficacious way to drive down global greenhouse gas emissions. So I'll stop there. Thank you.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. There's so many good points you both are bringing up. I was wondering if maybe you could speak a little bit about either what your organization does to advocate around carbon pricing, either in the legislature or with other organizations, and or just what are your current advocacy priorities around creation and climate issues. Tori, we can start with you.
Yeah, it's definitely a busy and exciting time for advocacy for us. So I'll start with talking about ways we've engaged with carbon pricing. So a few years ago, YECA endorsed the biblical principles in the Green New Deal, including justice, love of neighbor, and meaningful protection of the earth. And so to live up to those principles, we called for bipartisan legislation to enact it. And at the time, we put 2 action alerts out calling on Congress to pass the Energy Innovation Carbon Dividend Act and the Reclaim Act. And since then, we have continued to encourage people to call their legislators and send messages in support of a price on carbon as one of the ways to boldly address climate change. Right now, we are working really hard on infrastructure because we think this is a really unique and powerful opportunity to build back from COVID-19 and to work for a better, healthier future. And so we've been really hard at work urging Congress to not abandon clean energy, climate resiliency, and commitments to justice for frontline communities in their discussion on what should or shouldn't be included in an infrastructure package. And so we have an open letter to Congress that we are currently collecting signatures on. And we just launched a summer of action to generate awareness and support for clean energy provisions in the package.
Thank you, Tori. Mirroring again a lot of what you're doing. I would say that our advocacy writ large is in 3 buckets. First is pricing carbon, not in priority order, just 3 buckets. And we do have an action alert asking our constituents to support the Energy Innovation and Carbon Dividend Act, and that is in our website. Secondly, we also support infrastructure provisions along the principles that Tori mentioned. And then thirdly, we will be coming out with a U.S. Catholic-wide petition in support of those principles, as well as U.S. leadership in the UNFCCC negotiations of COP26. So really asking for very bold leadership and for global action to reduce greenhouse gas emissions.
Great.
And sorry, I would also say with regard to carbon dividend efforts, we are working with CCL's Catholic Action Team under the leadership of Steve Coleman and Andy Pinelli to figure out ways in which we can lift up a very faith-based Catholic voice to call for support of carbon pricing.
Wonderful. Thank you both. I think we'll go to some questions. We have so many great questions already coming in, so I want to give time to these. So the first one is pastors are scared of this issue and as divisive in largely conservative congregations. Fear of losing church members with financial impact is a real concern that they have. So what help should we give to them to take more active positions on creation care? And whoever wants to have thoughts about that first.
I can take the first stab unless you're ready, Jose.
Okay, sure. Well, this is the eternal question that many faith people who care about climate encounter. We at the Covenant get this question all the time. Sometimes we don't have great answers. What I would say though is we, the Covenant, are having our second conference virtually. June 13th to the 15th, and one of our sessions is with our creation care teams, and one of the very explicit questions they seek to answer and have very tangible solutions is, how do I speak to my pastor or bishop who is reluctant on these issues, and they will delve more deeply into that, having practiced that, and some of them have Catholic laity having lived this for years. So I'm not trying to pass on this question. Actually, one of my suggestions, which is near and dear to your heart, is CCL's model as they engage with legislators is the very same model that you should engage with your pastors and bishops. With that spirit of openness and humility and desiring to meet them where they are and to educate and continue those dialogues, that is absolutely the way. We do, though, also acknowledge that there may be some pastors and bishops who will not step into this. And so look for other faith communities in your area, those who resonate in the same way, and continue to lift up that charism.
It's really good, Jose. Thank you for starting off that important question that we do get a lot as well at YECA. And I do really appreciate the gracious way the question was posed and, how do we overcome this? For pastors who do want to speak out, but might be scared of the divisive nature, first, I would encourage them that this hasn't always been a divisive issue. And my hope is that one day it won't be divisive. And I think as Christians, we are called to boldly speak the truth in love, and that isn't always easy. And I think if we approach talking about creation care in church from a scriptural perspective, from the perspective of sharing stories and building on shared values, that can be a really great way to go about having those more difficult discussions, depending on your congregation. I've also heard from pastors who have been a little nervous to have these conversations, but it turns out that there are more people in the congregation than they thought who are eager to start engaging with this issue from a faith-based perspective. So this is something that definitely is a very real concern, and that I hope we continue to learn how to best engage with.
Yeah, those are really good thoughts and ideas. Okay, the next question we have. So this person has association with evangelicals who feel that degradation does not need to be addressed. If it is happening, it is the will of God. How would you counter that type of argument or engage with that argument? Tori, do you want to start this one first?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's something I've certainly run into. And Dr. Catherine Aho, an evangelical climate scientist, I believe I saw her name come up in the chat as folks were talking. She describes this way better than I ever can, but she has this great video that I love to come back to, where she talks about how God created the world with this perfect blanket over it, with the perfect temperature and resources to sustain life. But as we pump fossil fuels into the air, as we keep burning fossil fuels and creating pollution, we're adding extra blankets. It's very easy to see how humans are changing God's design, God's plan for the creation. And so I think starting in that way and talking about how we can see the impacts humans are having. And there are many ways. I mean, I firmly believe, we all fall short of the glory of God. And I think that applies to a lot of things and not just the environment. And I know a lot of people who feel that way in the church as well. So I just view this as another manifestation of that. And I think throughout scripture, I understand it as we're called to love our neighbors, and we can see the way our neighbors are suffering. And so I think we should care for people's needs here and now. So that's just a short answer to a really important question. And I really appreciate the person who raised it.
Yeah, Jose, additional thoughts?
Beautifully said, Tori. Thank you.
Yeah. This question is similar to the first one, but a little bit broader in terms of just, again, I think this common theme of how do we dialogue with people that feel like the church maybe should not be involved in politics at all, and especially things like climate change policy. So in terms of that dynamic between politics and faith and church and how those interplay, how would you engage in that discussion? Or any other thoughts? I know, Tori, you mentioned some good thoughts about bringing it back to scripture, things like that, but any other ideas around how to engage with that?
I just quickly, in response to your question, I quickly pulled up from the U.S. Catholic Conference of Bishops, the 7 themes of Catholic social teaching, which talk about, we believe people have a right and a duty to participate in society, seeking together the common good and the well-being of all, especially the poor and vulnerable. So to go to the question of whether we should participate in quote unquote politics, this is part of our charism to bring the gospel into the political space as we do to all spaces. So that is, if you will, doctrine or part of our Catholic social teaching. The second dimension, it relates to just now, one of the 7 themes is to care for God's creation. So to take that charism into the political space, and as was mentioned earlier with regard to the USCCB statement on climate change, that we don't view it as a partisan issue. We do it for care of God's creation and recognition of we are one human family.
Amen. That was really well put. Thank you, Jose.
Well, I think we only have a couple minutes left. So to end things today, would both of you mind sharing, this is the last question, what is your favorite inspiring scripture and why? Not to put you totally on the spot. If you can't name the chapter and verse, maybe just a general thought around it.
I'm going to go first, actually, because I've been mirroring Tori this entire time. And she quoted the greatest commandment. That is the greatest commandment. That is my foundation, because that is what Jesus said is the greatest commandment. And then he emphasized it as this is what all the law and prophets stand upon: to love thy neighbor as yourself, to love God, the Creator. Period. That's my favorite.
Yeah.
This is a fun question. I like to always say, it is written. I'm not good with the chapters and verses, but early on in the Psalms where we read that the heavens testify to the glory of God, the skies proclaim the work of his hands. I like to tie that back to Romans 1:20 about how creation demonstrates who God is. I love being outside and exploring creation. That's where I feel closest to God. So I really appreciate verses that draw that connection.
Beautiful. Well, we will all be inspired to go look into our Bibles and find some of these beautiful scriptures. So thank you both again for this breakout. I know we're kind of going to wrap up now. Tori and Jose, I don't know if you have any other last things you want to say. Otherwise, we can just thank everyone and wish them to enjoy the rest of the conference.
Just a quick note, I put in the chat our ask for the HR 2307, as well as the link to our conference in July.
Perfect. Thank you all so much, and enjoy the rest of the conference.
Thank you, Andrea. Thank you. Thank you, Tori.
Thank you all. Thanks, Jose. Thanks, everyone, for watching.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Citizens Climate Lobby's training program. You can tune into more episodes anywhere podcasts are available. Inspired by what you heard today? Join Citizens Climate Lobby to advocate for bipartisan climate solutions. Go to community.citizensclimate.org to find more trainings, resources, your local chapter, national action teams, discussion forums, and more. Be sure to like our Facebook page and follow us on Twitter and Instagram @CitizensClimate. We also invite all of our listeners to subscribe to our YouTube channel for more inspiration. And together, we are creating the political will for a livable world.